So today I'll be continuing with my college football game by game prediction and roster discussion videos. Today I'll be doing the Ole Miss Rebels. So Ole Miss only returns 42% of their production from last season, which ranks last in the SEC and 113th in the country. But their recruiting has improved a lot under Lane Kiffin. In 2025, Ole Miss had the 19th ranked recruiting class in the country. So starting on the offensive side of the ball, they averaged at 36.6 points per game last year, and that's actually a pretty deceiving number because they put up a whole bunch of points against all the little teams they played, but it didn't score a lot against the SEC competition. Ole Miss's offense wasn't as good last year as I thought it would be. But I do think that their offense will be solid this year, but I don't think it will be great. So starting at quarterback, Austin Simmons is a four-star recruit, and he will be a sophomore this season. And he played in one drive against Georgia and got them a touchdown. On that drive, he was 5 of 6 for 64 yards. He played really well. And then he did lead a scoring drive against Arkansas, going 3 of 3 for 47 yards and a touchdown pass on that drive. But other than against little teams, that's about all of the college experience that he has. That he only threw 32 passes last season. He completed 59.4%, which is not great, but he had an 8.8 yards per throw average. I do think that he will be pretty good, but he's not going to be as good this year as Jackson Dart was last year. And at wide receiver, they're going to miss Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, but they do have Caden Lee coming back, who had a really good year last year with 57 catches for 874 yards and 2 touchdowns, averaging 15.3 a catch. I think he'll be the top wide receiver for Ole Miss this year. And they bring in a really good wide receiver from Oklahoma State, Design Stribling. He had last year 52 catches for 882 and 6 touchdowns, averaging 17 yards a catch, which is a very good average. And they bring in from Penn State Harrison Wallace, who played in 15 games last year and had 46 catches for 720 yards and 4 touchdowns, averaging 15.7 a catch. He was an inconsistent wide receiver last year, but he was Penn State's best wide receiver last year. Even though Tyler Warren was their best pass catcher, he was a tight end. And they bring in a transfer wide receiver from Alabama who's a four-star recruit. Caleb Odom. He barely played though last year at Alabama when he was a freshman. He only had 7 catches, but I expect him to be a pretty big part of the Ole Miss wide receiver room this season. And then at tight end, they do lose Caden Prescorn, who was good, but I think Daquan Wright is going to do a good job at tight end this year. Last year, he played in all 13 games and only made 4 starts, but he had 27 catches for 394 and 4 touchdowns, averaging 14.6 a catch. And then at running back, as an Ole Miss fan, Ulysses Bentley is the only running back from last season that I will miss. But they do have Logan Diggs, who transferred to Ole Miss last year, but didn't play last year because of an injury. And he's a very good running back. Ole Miss is actually his third college that he's played for. He started his career at Notre Dame and was there for 2 seasons. And in 2022, there he had in 12 games as only the running back number two on the team, 820 yards and 4 touchdowns, and averaged at 5 yards a carry on 165 carries. And then in 2023, he played for LSU and had in 10 games at 653 and 7 touchdowns, averaging 5.5 a carry on 119 carries. So as long as Lane Kiffin doesn't do something stupid with the running back room like he did last year, I expect Logan Diggs to be the starting running back. And they do bring in a transfer running back from Troy. Damian Taylor is his name. He had 1,010 yards and 7 touchdowns, averaging 5.8 a carry. Last year, I'd expect him to be running back number two. And on the offensive line, they were very solid last year in pass protection, but their run blocking was not very good. So they do return Diego Pounds, who did allow the most quarterback pressures of all offensive linemen on the team last year with 21, but that's still a pretty good number. And they bring in from Arkansas Patrick Kudus, a four-star recruit who was one of the top offensive linemen in the transfer portal. He's played in 26 college games and made 13 starts. He's a senior. And they bring in a offensive lineman from UAB, Delano Townsend. He was one of the top offensive linemen in the portal too. He had in 2024 11 starts and played in 12 games and only allowed 12 total pressures and 1 sack. I think Ole Miss will be okay on the offensive line, but I don't think they'll be great. And on the defensive side, they're going to take a pretty big step back here, I think, but their defense was so good last year that they can take a pretty big step back and still have a good defense. But last year they only allowed 13 points per game, and that was the third best in the country. And I do think they'll have a solid defense this year, but the defensive line is where I think they're going to take the biggest step back of all. That was their best position last year, in my opinion. They lose all four starters. Walter Nolan, Princely, Miellen, Jared Ivey, and JJ Begees. But they do have Xavier Harris coming back, who was a four-star recruit. He's a senior. He played in all 13 games last year and started 3 games. And had 32 tackles and 1.5 sacks and four total quarterback pressures and a forced fumble. And they bring in from Nebraska Princely, Amon Mielen's younger brother, Prince Amon Mielen, who was a four-star recruit. And he's played in 23 college games, even though he's only made one college start and hasn't all of that. 35 tackles and 2 sacks and 35 total quarterback pressures. I think he'll be really good for Ole Miss this year. And at linebacker, this is the biggest strength of their defense this year. They return two of the best linebackers in the country, Centurion Perkins and TJ Daugherty. Perkins is one of the best defensive players in the country. But last year he had 60 tackles and 10 and a half sacks, and that was almost an Ole Miss record for sacks, and 41 total quarterback pressures and an interception. He's their best pass rusher. And they've got a Daugherty that played in 12 games and started all 12 games that he played in last year and had 76 tackles and two sacks and six total quarterback pressures and a pass breakup and a forced fumble. And then they bring in a transfer linebacker from Marshall, Jaden Yates. He had a really good year last year with 120 tackles, and he had seven quarterback pressures and two pass breakups. And in the secondary, they've redone it with the transfer portal, but Trey Amos leaving is a big loss for them at cornerback, and I think that they're going to be down in the secondary this year. This is the part of the defense that I'm the most concerned about as an Ole Miss fan. So at cornerback, they bring in a transfer from South Alabama, Ricky Fletcher, who didn't play in 2024 because of an injury, but in 2023 he had 38 tackles and 12 pass breakups and a fumble recovery. And they bring in from Arkansas a four-star corner, Jalen Braxton, who didn't play in 2024 because of an injury, but in 2023, he played in 9 games and made six starts and had 20 tackles and eight pass breakups and an interception and a forced fumble and fumble recovery. And then at safety, they bring in a really good safety from Washington State, Capana Gushikin, who had last year 52 tackles and uh, six pass breakups and two interceptions. And then they bring in Ryan Sage from LSU, a five-star safety who is a senior and has played in 43 college games and made 21 college starts. And in 2024, he had in 12 games making nine starts, 42 tackles and five pass breakups and an interception and three forced fumbles and a sack. So they should be okay in the secondary, just not great. So now for the game by game predictions, starting with Georgia State, this will be a big blowout win for Ole Miss. They'll run the score way up probably into the 50s, and Georgia State will be lucky to get more than 10 points in this game. And now on the road at Kentucky. So I think that Ole Miss is going to get revenge even on the road for what Kentucky did to them last year. I do think though that this will be a pretty close game. So Kentucky is questionable at quarterback too. They bring in a transfer that I think it came from junior college, but the advantage for Ole Miss with this is they have Lane Kiffin coaching them, who's a great offensive mind that Kentucky won't have. And Kentucky loses most of their front seven from last year, which is really why they beat Ole Miss last year. And also, Austin Simmons is going to have a lot more good wide receivers to throw to than Kentucky's new quarterback will have. and now Arkansas. I do think this game will be much closer than it was last year, and it'll probably end up being a one-score game. But I think Ole Miss is going to beat Arkansas. Lane Kiffin is a much better coach than Sam Pittman is. I think that this will probably be Pittman's last year at Arkansas. There's just not really a lot to get excited about if you're an Arkansas fan. They're not that good offensively or defensively. And while I do like their quarterback, Taylon Green, he doesn't have the playmakers around him that Austin Simmons will have at Ole Miss. And Arkansas does not recruit very well either. But now Ole Miss is ahead of them in that too. And Tulane, this will probably be a somewhat competitive game. It'll probably be close at halftime because Tulane is a pretty good group of five team, but Ole Miss has way more talent than they do, and they'll pull away, I think, in the second half and win by about three touchdowns. So now LSU. I had a hard time with this when I was back and forth with my prediction for it because while I do think LSU is a better team than Ole Miss this year, the game is at Oxford. But LSU's defensive line, I think, is going to be after Simmons, and I think they're going to shut down the Ole Miss run game to where Ole Miss will probably rush for under 100 yards in this game. And Nussmeier and his wide receivers, led by Aaron Anderson, I think are going to pick apart the Ole Miss secondary. And with LSU's secondary bringing in those good transfers, they're probably going to do better stopping the Ole Miss passing attack than they were able to do the last 2 years. But I do think Ole Miss will still have some success passing in this game. But I'm going to go with LSU to get this win in a very close game. So now Washington State, like with Tulane, it'll probably be somewhat competitive and maybe it'll be close at halftime, but the Ole Miss has so much more talent and they'll pull away in the second half and win by at least three touchdowns, most likely. And now on the road at Georgia. So, like I said in the Georgia video, I don't see Ole Miss going on the road to Georgia and beating Kirby Smart a second year in a row. With the Ole Miss defense probably taking a big step back. So Georgia, I think, will score much more against Ole Miss this year than they did against them last year, but I still don't think they're going to score anywhere near what they did on Ole Miss the year before. I do think this will be a close game, but I do think the Ole Miss offense is going to have a hard time in this game. And now on the road at Oklahoma. So this really came down to home field advantage for me. So that's why I went with Oklahoma. But I would not be surprised at all if Ole Miss won this game. But the Oklahoma defensive line, I think, is going to make it hard for Ole Miss to run the football. And I think that they're going to be after Austin Simmons a lot in this game. And Oklahoma's offensive line, I remember last year against Ole Miss, did pretty well in the first half against the defensive line that was much better than it's going to be at Ole Miss this year. So that and Oklahoma going to have a much better quarterback this year than Jackson Arnold was enough for me to pick Oklahoma in this game. But I think it'll be a defensive game, but I do think Ole Miss is gonna be able to still have some success throwing on Oklahoma and South Carolina. I think this will be much better. I mean, much closer of a game than it was last year, and South Carolina will score a lot more than 3 points. But I do like Lane Kiffin better than I do Beamer as a coach. And while Lenore Sellers is much more experienced than Austin Simmons is at quarterback, he's not going to have near as many good options to throw to as that Simmons will. And Ole Miss, I think, has a little bit better running back room and offensive line than South Carolina's got. And then comparing the defenses between the two, the real difference to me is the linebackers for Ole Miss, I think, are a lot better than South Carolina. So I think this will be a lower scoring game. That'll be pretty close, but I'm going to go with Ole Miss to get this win. And now Citadel, this will be like a 70 to nothing win probably. Ole Miss will have their second string in the whole second half of it. And now Florida. So even though Lane Kiffin lost to Florida last year, I am still glad that he is the coach at Ole Miss and not Billy Napier. I think this is going to be Billy Napier's last year at Florida. While Florida did beat Ole Miss with DJ Lagway at quarterback last year, it wasn't really because of him. He didn't play very well in that game. It was because Florida had their best game defensively of the season. And Florida's defense, I think, is going to be good enough again to give Ole Miss's offense a hard time in this game. But outside of Eugene Wilson, I don't know who DJ Lagway is going to throw the football to. The wide receiver room at Florida is not very good. And Florida's got a decent running back room, but I still think Ole Miss is going to be good enough in the front seven to slow that down. So I think this it will be a close four-quarter game, lower scoring, but I'm going to go with Ole Miss to get revenge. And now on the road at Mississippi State. So even though this one is a rivalry on the road, I can't pick Ole Miss to lose this game because they're so much better of a program right now than Mississippi State is. Now this will be a competitive game like it always is, and it'll probably be a four-quarter game, but I think Ole Miss will get this win by around 10 points. So my prediction for Ole Miss this year is 9-3 overall and 5-3 in the conference, which will keep them out of the SEC championship and college football playoff. But this feels like a 9-3 team to me. And even though Ole Miss was a 9-3 team last year, the team seemed better than a normal 9-3 team. Seemed like a team that should have at least went at 10-2. But that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.